What is up guys, my name is Ignace, welcome back to the channel. Last time with the dividend portfolio update, we also found out that we are lacking exposure in the industrial sector. Currently we have $2,129.34 there. That is 12.34% of the dividend portfolio, though the target is set at 14%. So this is the market sector that I would like to increase exposure of this dividend portfolio with the next month's cash addition. Now from industrials I have 4 names in the portfolio, and I think that Caterpillar ticker symbol CAT should be something to consider. Currently we have $706 in the position, and that takes 4.09% of this dividend portfolio. But now the question becomes, is CAT a good pick to add new money into right now? Or should we pick something else from a similar heavy machinery industry? And that's where a dividend comparison comes in. So for today I've picked 3 names from the farm and heavy construction machinery industry. These are the ticker symbol DE, Caterpillar CAT, and the heavy truck manufacturing company PACCAR ticker symbol PCAR. So for the dividend comparison we'll check into 8 different metrics: quarterly revenue, price to earnings, number of shares outstanding, dividend yield, dividend payout ratio, years of consecutive dividend increases, 5-year compound annual dividend growth rate, and the current dividend yield compared to its 5-year average. So we'll find out which company has better fundamentals, then we'll assign points 3, 2 or 1. So 3 points for the best number out of these 3 names, 2 points for the middle and then 1 for the worst. Then we'll sum those points up, and then the stock with the most points will be considered the winner of this dividend comparison. So let us find out if Caterpillar is the stock to pick for the next month's cash addition, or if we should consider adding a new name into the dividend portfolio. An early thumbs up is greatly appreciated, and with that out of the way, let's start. So the first metric we are taking a look into is quarterly revenue. Here we have Deere's results over the last 5 years, and from here we would like to find out for how many quarters Deere was decreasing revenue quarter over quarter. So we see some negative quarters back in 2020, in spring losing 18.42%, where revenue totaled at $36.8 billion. Then we see 3 years in a row of greenness, but with 2024 revenue has started to decline. The worst was by the end of the year, $11.1 billion for the quarter, minus 27.69%, and then beginning of this year it is even worse. The company brought only $8.5 billion in revenue, which is minus 30.18% quarter over quarter. So overall in the last 5 years, Deere managed to bring in 10 quarters of negative growth, and most of those happened in the last 2 years. Now let's take Caterpillar. The trend here seems to be quite similar, so we see negative quarters in 2020. Worst one was where they brought just $10 billion, a decrease of 30.73%. Another quarter of under 10 billion just after. Then for 3 years there was an increase, went up to $67 billion on the trailing 12 months. But now last 4 quarters we again see negativity. So the most recent quarter they reported in 2024, bringing in $16.2 billion, which is a negative quarter, minus 5.01%. So this is just a bit better than Deere, but still 9 negative quarters over the last 5 years. And lastly we have PACCAR. Again the same situation, was not doing good in 2020. Revenue dropped, bottoming at $3.06 billion, a decrease of 53.8%. Then afterwards for years they have been consistently inching up higher, though again not doing that good in 2024. And with the most recent quarter in, revenue came at $7.9 billion, a decrease of 12.88% on the quarter year over year. So all 3 companies following a similar trend, but PACCAR only having 8 negative quarters of the last 5 years. Now the second metric is price to earnings, and here we see 5-year history for Deere. So back in 2020 the stock was trading at a P/E ratio of 14.52, then it started surging upwards. And in the beginning of 2021 we see a peak of 25.19. After that, with earnings gradually increasing, the P/E ratio was also slowly moving lower, In 2023, we saw a bottom of the P/E ratio at 10.4, but in the recent few years, we see earnings per share going lower, so the P/E ratio is again increasing, and now we see it again over 20 at 21.27. So though it is not the top, but still one of the largest price to earnings for the company over the last 5 years. Now Caterpillar. So in 2020 we had the P/E ratio at 11, then it started going upwards, and then in 2021 in earnings per share going a bit lower, we had the P/E peaking at 34.43. Though afterwards it went down as quickly as it went up. 2022 we again had the P/E ratio at 11.43, and though it went up a bit higher in the recent 2 years, it is still trading pretty much in line under 20, with the most recent P/E ratio at 16.01. So way more in line of what we have seen over the last 5 years. Now the last one is PACCAR, and this looks more similar to Caterpillar than Deere. So in 2020 P/E ratio bottoming at 8.62, then a surge upwards, and in 2021 we see it at 20, then again in a year dropping closer to 10, going sideways for the next 3 years, and currently we see the P/E ratio at 13.4, very much in line or even lower to what we have seen over the last 5 years. Now metric number 3 is the number of shares outstanding. Here we have information on Deere for the last 5 years. So back in 2020 the number was at 317 million shares, and we can find out they have been consistently reducing on that. So the largest reduction year over year for the quarter was in 2024, minus 6.4% to 278 million shares. And now with the most recent numbers, we again have minus 3.2% to 272 million shares. So in the last 5 years, Deere has decreased the number of shares out by 45 million, which is in turn a reduction of 14.2%. Now let's take CAT. In 2019, the number of shares out was at 568 million. Then after 2 years in 2021, they managed to increase the number of shares out a bit. We see a quarter plus 1.28% year over year, but afterwards they stayed consistent, and with the most recent quarter in, we can find a decrease of 6.03% and the number of shares out at 483 million. So in the last 5 years, Caterpillar decreased the number of shares out by 85 million, which is a close reduction to Deere, but just a bit larger at almost 15%. And now let's take PACCAR, though here is a totally different story. So in 2019 we have the number of shares out at 521 million, but what they did differently from the first 2 names is that for PACCAR the number of shares out actually went up. And now with the most recent number, we have the number of shares at 527 million. So this means that in 5 years they have increased the number of shares out by 6 million, which is a higher number by 1.15%. So we have checked into fundamentals, but now for the next few metrics let's focus more on dividends. And here we'll compare the dividend yields. So Deere is paying an annual dividend of $6.48 per share, which at a share price of $480.22, that is a dividend yield of 1.35%. Now Caterpillar, their dividend is $5.64 per share, which means at a price of $353.32, we have a dividend yield of 1.6%. And lastly PACCAR, a dividend of $1.32, so at a price of $105.96, it is a dividend yield of 1.25%. Now metric number 5 is the dividend payout ratio. So what part of company's earnings is assigned to pay dividends? For Deere, the dividend payout ratio is at 29.06%. Switching to Caterpillar, and their dividend payout ratio is 24.61%. And then lastly PACCAR, actually with the best number, a payout ratio of 14.53%. Now dividend increases. So for how many years in a row the company has been consistently increasing dividends? For Deere the number is 4 years. Now Caterpillar, and there is a lot more consistency, with 30 years of consecutive dividend increases. And lastly PACCAR, that is closer to Deere with 5 years of dividend increases. For metric number 7, we're taking a look into the compound annual dividend growth rate. We're taking the 5-year average with estimate for 2025. So for Deere, the growth rate is 16.34%, then Caterpillar, and the number is worse with growth rate at 6.48%, and then lastly PACCAR, with 5-year dividend growth rate at 9.12%. Now the last metric we are taking a look into is the dividend yield compared to its 5-year average. For that we'll use my dividend investing watch list on Google Sheets. So we are in the tab for Deere. Here we have its dividend yield history over the last 5 years. Currently the stock is trading at a yield of 1.31%, and on average in 5 years we have seen the dividend yield at 1.29%. So the stock is now trading just above its 5-year average plus 1.54%. Taking a look into history, the best time to get into the stock was back in 2020, with a yield of 2.14%, higher than 5-year average by 65.89%, and worst time was in 2021 with a yield of 0.85%, lower than average minus 34.11%. Though if we would be buying the stock right now at those mentioned 1.31%, that is pretty much in line of the last 5 years, just a bit higher with 1.54%. Now Caterpillar, we have its dividend yield history over the last 5 years, and on average the stock was trading at a yield of 2.05%. So again, the best time to get in was back in 2020, with a yield of 3.5%, higher than average for 70.74%. But interestingly, the worst time was very recent in 2024, with a yield of 1.38%, below the 5-year average minus 32.68%. And this seems to be ongoing, because the stock is now trading at a dividend yield of 1.64%, which is still below the 5-year average minus 20.06%. Lastly, let's take a look into PACCAR. So from its dividend yield history of the last 5 years, we can calculate the average yield at 3.46%. And this includes their special dividend that they have seemed to be consistently paying out in the last few years. So the best time to get into the stock was back in 2020, with a yield of 5.13%, higher than the 5-year average plus 48.47%. Then similarly to Deere, the worst was in 2021, 2.03% on the dividend yield, below average 41.25%, though where the stock is trading right now, at a yield of 4.02%, that is actually higher than the 5-year average plus 16.36%. So we have finished with all 8 metrics for these 3 companies. I have added the numbers into this table, and now we can start assigning points. So for revenue, PACCAR gets 3 points, with only 8 negative quarters over the last 5 years. Price to earnings again PACCAR, with the lowest P ratio of the 3, and in line of what we have seen there over the last 5 years. Number of shares outstanding goes to Caterpillar, where they have decreased the number of shares out by 14.97%. Dividend yield to Caterpillar, with a dividend on the stock of 1.6%. For the dividend payout ratio, 3 points goes to PACCAR, with a ratio of 14.53%. Years of consecutive dividend increases goes to Caterpillar, where they have been consistently increasing dividends over the last 30 years. Dividend growth first time 3 points for Deere, where the 5-year dividend growth rate is at 16.34%. And lastly, the dividend yield compared to its 5-year average, that goes to PACCAR, where its stock is now trading at a dividend yield higher than the 5-year average for 16.36%. So the numbers for the metrics are assigned, and we can calculate results. Deere got 1 best metric and 13 points, Caterpillar 3 best metrics with 17, and PACCAR 4 best metrics with 18 points. So with a sum of 18, PACCAR is considered the winner of this dividend comparison. So we have finished with the dividend comparison. I now need to contemplate if PACCAR should be added into the portfolio, but Caterpillar was also close, so maybe just keep on adding into that. What do you think? Should we add a new position of PACCAR or keep increasing in Caterpillar? Share your preferable pick in a comment below. Also, don't forget to support the channel and put the thumbs up under the video. Now, if by any chance you would be interested in more details of this dividend portfolio, I just made the monthly update on it. The link for it is on the screen right now. And that was it from me for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.
Dividend.